Assalamu alaikum, Mahwish.
Walaikum assalam wa rahmatullah.
Thank you for taking out time for another one. हमने कुछ themes decide किए हैं जिन पे हम बात करना चाहते हैं over a series of podcasts, and the second theme that we have chosen kind of links to the first one of life worthy learning, और ये वाला है motivation के ऊपर. So let's just dive in because I like diving in. Everyone knows who we are now, right? So Mahwish, when was the last time you were really motivated to do something, and what did that feel like? वो था क्या, and आपने क्या feelings क्या थी आपकी उसके बारे में?
The last time I was really motivated, okay. I think feelings, अगर आप पूछें कि क्या थी उसके बारे में, for me it has always got to do with meaning. If there's something meaningful and if there's space that I can learn something about it, it really gets me motivated. It could be a very boring thing also. लेकिन अगर मुझे वो लगे कि उसमें कुछ ऐसा aspect है जो मेरे लिए intrinsically कोई meaningful चीज़ है, and there is room for me to understand something or explore it, I get excited, motivated.
And what was that thing that you were doing that got you really motivated?
I find these seeds, small things, बहुत mundane चीज़ों में भी मेरे लिए हो जाता है. It doesn't have to be a very dramatic thing like a life-changing moment or a very big goal. Even in very subliminal small things, like it could even be a recipe
That got you motivated.
that I thought was very complex, but now I found a way of doing it in a simpler way or something. Yeah, so very small things. Last time, if I think about it, what got me motivated was actually I was doing this research study on this French sociologist. Again, names, please excuse the mispronunciation, because we read these names and we don't pronounce them naturally in conversations as frequently. So when I was reading about his theory, I got like a couple of books from the library, and then I started seeing the world according to it. So I got really motivated to actually understand his works more, not just superficial. And it kind of started a spark which I am still carrying, and I'm sustaining it, even though my research has now moved away from that particular topic. But yeah, that was
So that's one.
Yes.
Now let's do like 2 more instances of you being really motivated, because I want us to figure out what the pattern is, right?
What the pattern is. Okay.
It can be
I would say कि मेरा ज़्यादातर motivation actually coincidentally is related to something I'm learning, mostly. Something I'm getting to know, something that I'm learning. So एक तो ये मैंने आपको बताया जो research वाला था. दूसरा I can trace is when I started to get the hang of Arabic language. Then I was like on fire. क्योंकि वो बिल्कुल flip हो गई थी equation मेरे लिए. I was extremely unmotivated. Extremely unmotivated. Like to the extent that I was like, I can, let go of the whole deal because I'm so unmotivated to learn this language कि मैं ये सारा किस्सा ही ख़त्म कर सकती हूँ.
I remember you telling me, and then you came up with a formula for figuring out how to learn Arabic.
So that window, if it opens, perception की होती है, अल्लाह सुब्हानहू तआला जो भी इंसान को disposition उस वक्त उसकी होती है, like we were discussing in the last session. But yes, that is a clear time in my life where I can see कि I was very motivated. I got like, एक momentum बन गया था मेरा. Yeah.
And another incident, last one, promise. And then let's figure out what the pattern is.
Last one. I think when I was teaching middle school, and we were discussing the elements. ईमान, इस्लाम और एहसान जब हम पढ़ रहे थे, so I could see in them some level of coming together of those things, which I have not seen in really like advanced adults, grown-ups, जो कि बहुत ही उनका सतही understanding का level रह जाता है, even though their age and maturity demands a higher understanding. So in those middle school children, when I could see कि हाँ, they are, able to see something, it was extreme burst of motivation कि यार, this can be done, ये किया जा सकता है. Yeah.
Okay. So what are the patterns now, Mahwish? Can you identify your own patterns of motivation? Because you started off by saying that anything that's meaningful for me is the source for my motivation. But you have said some things over here, जिनमें कुछ और चीज़ें भी, they're that kind of standing out. Are they standing out for you?
I'm not sure. I think if you spell them out to me, I would be able to learn something.
Like, I feel like one is meaning, right? Which you started off with. The other is how those things impact you, your personal life, like how they are related to your day-to-day life and how you can benefit from those things, right? When you said you started seeing things around you and you could make those connections, and those connections were personally meaningful for you, not only to the extent that they were benefiting someone else, but they were benefiting your own worldview. Then you also mentioned this thing of being in flow with Arabic, and that was also because you're feeling really competent when you were doing that. So if you're not feeling competent about something, maybe that is when you're not feeling motivated as well.
Possibly.
So that can be another one. And who asked you to do all of this that you were doing?
Nobody asked me. That's a privilege I've had in life, alhamdulillah.
Yeah.
And I hope, I guess, उसकी answerability भी उतनी होती है, but I don't have as many demands on me. And I have chartered, अल्लाह का शुक्र है कि जो अपनी curiosity और जो सोच थी उसके मुताबिक काफ़ी मौका मिला. So nobody asked me.
Imagine like if I had asked you to do the same for a subject that you don't feel strongly about. What subject don't you don't feel strongly about?
I don't sometimes feel strongly about teachers, but subjects I generally tend to like. So
Or an action or an act that you don't feel strongly about, like
small talk.
Yeah, so imagine that instead of asking you to go and teach middle...
That's gone off, I don't know.
I think. Okay. So imagine that rather than asking you to teach children in middle school at the school, we had asked you to be a small talk manager at the school. So just having control over what you were doing, or having that autonomy might have helped you stay motivated. Might be, I don't know. These are some of the patterns that I can identify.
No, that's very accurate actually. That's very accurate. That if you make like a condition for me, then yes. And that's, I think, true for so many people who grow up and say, if you tell me what to do, I'll do the opposite. Like I've heard, I think majority people say that. I don't do that necessarily, but definitely motivation goes down because maybe somewhere I feel like I can't explore this as meaningfully as I want to.
Yeah.
And I have to do it and just be done with it. तो उसमें meaning का level नीचे चला जाता है, duty का level ऊपर आ जाता है, and that kind of dulls the moment. Yeah.
So what is motivation then?
Motivation, देखें, that again, like social science है, there is psychological aspects, there's spiritual aspects, right? For me, motivation is closely related to meaning. Very closely. And it's consistently been that. Whether it is in something that I'm doing, a job, it's in education, it's in what I'm telling my children, it's in a relationship I'm building. If there is meaningfulness in it, then I feel like it gives that pleasure, or that pleasure itself kind of, ups the motivation point.
So I guess keeping in mind the different experiences जो आपने share किए, मैंने share किए, let's use self-determination and self-efficacy की theory to summarize what motivation is, right? Motivation is when we want to do something that we have control over, motivation is there when it is personally meaningful for us to do that thing, and motivation is there when we feel competent to do that specific thing, right? एंड अगर ये एलिमेंट्स मिसिंग होते हैं तो इंसान का दिल नहीं करता काम करने का, और जब इंसान के पास ये एलिमेंट्स अवेलेबल होते हैं तो चांसेस होते हैं कि अगर हम कुछ सीखना चाहें तो वो हम एक सस्टेन तरीके से उस इंक्वायरी को लेके चल सकेंगे. विच टेक्स मी टू द नेक्स्ट क्वेश्चन ऑफ ह्यूमन डिज़ाइन एंड फितरत, राइट? क्योंकि एवरीथिंग अगेन ये जो हमने थेरीज की भी बात की, दे आर एक्सट्रैक्टेड फ्रॉम हाउ ह्यूमन्स बिहेव एंड व्हाट motivates people to keep on going, right? So उसके अंदर एक बहुत फितरत, क्योंकि कहते हैं ना बच्चे फितरत पे होते हैं एंड उनकी जो पर्सनालिटी है वो फितरत पे होती है, तो फितरी तौर पे तो हम बड़े क्यूरियस बीइंग्स हैं. व्हेन वी आर बॉर्न, एंड कहते हैं कि एक स्टडी है, बहुत लंबी चौड़ी स्टडी है, 13 मंथ से लेके 6 years तक उन्होंने बच्चों को स्टडी किया और उन्होंने कहा कि in a given year the children ask 100,000 questions in first few years of their lives. So उन्होंने एक पूरा डेटा एनालिसिस करके किया कि this is the number that comes out. So naturally तो हम बहुत ज़्यादा curious beings हैं, and obviously there is this decline in curiosity that happens, and there are reasons for why this happened. But आपको क्या लगता है कि क्या होता है? क्योंकि बच्चे तो बड़े सवाल पूछते हैं, आहिस्ता 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 सवाल भी कम हो जाते हैं, लेजीनेस भी आ जाती है, एक एटीट्यूड में शिफ्ट आ जाता है. इज़ इट जस्ट स्कूलिंग? इज़ इट अ नेचुरल कोर्स ऑफ लाइफ? व्हाट इज़ हैपनिंग दैट चेंजेस अस so much that we are no longer as curious as we used to be? हम 100,000 questions as adults तो नहीं पूछ रहे होते in our lives.
I think there are multiple factors at play. कुछ चीज़ें not necessarily a bad thing. It's also a part of maturation. कि जब एक बच्चा चाइल्डिशनेस ख़त्म होने का भी एक एलिमेंट है कि इंसान इम्पल्सिव इतना नहीं रहता कि वॉट एवर स्ट्राइक्स यू एकदम से सवाल जो इंसान करता है, तो वो चाइल्ड लाइक तो रहना चाहिए ना, बट चाइल्डिश नहीं रहना चाहिए. दैट्स व्हाट दे से, राइट? सो आई थिंक कुछ नेचुरल एलिमेंट्स भी हैं कि वो मैच्योर होने के साथ उसका थॉट प्रोसेस थोड़ा मैच्योर हो जाता है. दे माइट बी मोर रिफ्लेक्टिव रादर देन आस्किंग ऑलवेज, however, but there are certainly, I think, आप जो जिनकी तरफ इशारा कर रही हैं वो भी चीज़ें हैं कि कुछ लॉस भी है, कहीं मोटिवेशन का या क्यूरियोसिटी का लॉस भी होता है, फॉर श्योर. उसके लिए काफ़ी कंट्रीब्यूटर्स होते हैं. आई थिंक अर्ली चाइल्डहुड एक्सपीरियंसेस, जिस तरह आप तो काफ़ी, इट्स अगेन कॉमन नॉलेज कि दैट डिटर्मिन्स योर डिस्पोजिशन में भी आपकी बहुत सारी चीज़ें आ जाती हैं. कैसे रिस्पॉन्ड करते हैं जो फर्स्ट उसके लाइन ऑफ केयर गिवर्स हैं, हाउ डू दे रिस्पॉन्ड टू क्वेश्चंस, व्हाट एक्सपेक्टेशंस आर दे सेटिंग, बिकॉज लाइक यू आर सेइंग मोस्ट चिल्ड्रन दे बिहेव सिमिलरली, क्योंकि फितरत पे होते हैं तो उनकी काफ़ी सिमिलैरिटी होती है, स्पेशली यंगर देन 4-5 years में तो बहुत ही सिमिलर होते हैं, राइट? देयर अ ट्राइब इन देयर ओन जो बच्चे हैं. लेकिन ओवर टाइम आई थिंक कि उनको किस किस्म का रिस्पॉन्स मिलता है उससे बहुत फ़र्क पड़ता है. वेदर दैट इज़ द पेरेंट्स, दैन इवेंचुअली जब स्कूल जाते हैं उनके पीयर्स कैसे हैं, क्लासरूम एनवायरनमेंट क्या है, पावर डायनामिक क्या है क्लास में, इससे भी बहुत फ़र्क पड़ता है, राइट? सो आई थिंक व्हाट यू mentioned as the defining theory you are going with when it comes to motivation, वो elements कम होते जाते हैं. Having control, feeling competent, तो वो फिर that brightness of things, it loses its shine over time. But I think कि अगर इंसान इन चीज़ों को बहुत permanent losses भी नहीं समझना चाहिए. There is always a comeback, अल्लाह सुब्हान तआला ने इंसान को इतनी स्ट्रेंथ दी है कि वो वापस आता रहता है, एंड यू आर नेवर बिगिनिंग फ्रॉम ज़ीरो, यू आर ऑलवेज बिगिनिंग फ्रॉम एक्सपीरियंस, राइट? तो अगर मोटिवेशन स्ट्राइक डाउन हो भी जाए बच्चों की, देयर इज़ होप, राइट? बट आपके नज़रिए में ऐसा क्या है, लाइक बीइंग अ स्कूल हेड, अगर खाली हम स्कूल को देखें, जस्ट अ क्लासरूम, उसमें सबसे ज़्यादा इम्पैक्टफुल एलिमेंट्स क्या हैं और किस एज के लिए वो होते हैं जो बच्चों की मोटिवेशन को इंक्रीज़ करें, सस्टेन करें और उनको ऐसे इंडिविजुअल्स बनाएं जो dull ना हो जाए जिनके सवालात. What are those age groups and what are those elements in a classroom?
I think obviously क्योंकि हम एक जो क्लासरूम है उसको पहले एज इज़ देखते हैं, जैसे कि ट्रेडिशनली क्लासरूम्स डिज़ाइन हुई हुई हैं, एंड देन आई कैन टॉक अबाउट व्हाट परहैप्स कैन बी डन इन माय हाइपोथेटिकल क्लासरूम, राइट. सो अभी के लिए क्या होता है कि बच्चे स्कूल जाते हैं तो वो शुरू से ही एक इन्वायरमेंट ऑफ कंट्रोल में चले जाते हैं. उनको बताया जाता है कि आपने पूरा दिन किस तरह गुजारना है, right from the get-go, preschool से लेके all the way till they graduate. It's a program that has been set for them with this intent in mind. शायद वो intent बुरी ना भी हो कि बच्चा सीख जाएगा और अगर हम उसको ये structure नहीं देंगे तो ज़ाया हो जाएगा. यही एक thought है जिसके पीछे वो पूरा एक structure बनाया हुआ होता है. बट अगर आप उसको डीपली क्लोजली इवेल्यूएट करें तो उसके अंदर सिर्फ ये थॉट अकेली नहीं होती है, फिर उसके अंदर बहुत सारे कंस्ट्रेंट्स आना शुरू हो जाते हैं, लॉजिस्टिकल कंस्ट्रेंट्स आते हैं प्राइमरीली, जिसकी वजह से जो है डिज़ाइन चेंज हो जाता है. डिज़ाइन रादर बन जाता है, चेंज तो नहीं होता. वो डिज़ाइन एक स्पेसिफिक बनना शुरू हो जाता है कि वो इतने सारे बच्चों को कंट्रोल में किस तरह रख सकते हैं जब तक आप उन्हें फिक्स सीट ना दें, जब तक आप उनको शिफ्टिंग ऑफ एडल्ट्स होती रहे, बच्चे एक ही जगह पे बैठे रहे, तभी केओस कम होगा. सो सारा कुछ जो हो रहा होता है वो उस केओस को कम करने के एक एफर्ट बन जाती है ऑन पार्ट ऑफ द एडल्ट्स, बिकॉज देयर आर टू मैनी लिटिल ह्यूमंस टू मैनेज एट द सेम टाइम. एंड एट द सेम टाइम हमारे जो आइडियाज़ ऑफ डिसिप्लिन हैं वो भी यही हैं कि खामोशी होगी तो डिसिप्लिन है एंड बाकी सब कुछ है. सो जो लॉजिस्टिकल फैक्टर्स हैं या एडमिनिस्ट्रेटिव फैक्टर्स हैं ये बहुत ज़्यादा कंट्रीब्यूट करते हैं इन सारे 3 फैक्टर्स की एलिमिनेशन में periodically, right? It has nothing to do with the bad intentions alone, कि जी just because traditional schools में जो heads है या जो कि administrators हैं बड़े evil हैं तो वो एक बड़ा उनका plan है कि हमने बच्चों की spirit break करनी है. spirit break होती logistical reasons की वजह से है. Now उसकी मैनिफेस्टेशन हमें समझ आ गई कि प्री स्कूल में भी वो बैठना एक ही जगह पर लाइंस में चलना वो सारा कुछ होना शुरू हो जाता है. टॉप डाउन होता है तो यू डोंट हैव टू केयर अबाउट के वेरिएबिलिटी क्या है क्लास में, बस सब ये सीख जाएँ, बेयर मिनिमम ये अचीव कर जाएँ, वो आगे जाके भी कंटिन्यू इसी तरह करते हैं. फिर जो बात आती है हाइपोथेटिकल डिज़ाइन में कि व्हाट रियली कुड परहैप्स बी देयर विच at this point is not, is कि सबसे पहले जो 3 से 6 साल की उम्र है, मे बी अराउंड दैट टाइम children are not too bothered by autonomy for that matter or meaning. They don't think कि ये मैं कर रहा हूँ उससे मुझे क्या फ़ायदा होगा. They're just in a very good space of mind कि बस सही है, let's have fun, let's explore things, let's do things. So उस टाइम पे बहुत ज़्यादा मैटर करती है कनेक्शन वाली चीज़, relatedness, connection with the educators, connection with the peers, दोस्ती हो पा रही है या नहीं हो पा रही है, that really motivates children to go to school. अगर टीचर अच्छी हैं, अगर दोस्त अच्छे हैं तो no matter what else is there, क्या वहाँ if the school is equipped well or not, if it has the best books or not, if it has the best fixtures and fittings or not, they don't care. They care कि मेरे दोस्त कौन है वहाँ पे, and is the teacher really waiting for me, is she going to miss me if I'm absent, So वहाँ पे कनेक्शन बहुत ज़्यादा मोटिवेट कर रहा होता है, एंड साथ साथ टू एन एक्सटेंट कॉम्पिटेंस भी कर रही होती है. बट आई स्टिल फील कि इफ इट्स अ प्ले बेस्ड स्कूल तो इतनी ज़्यादा कॉम्पिटेंस नहीं होती, दे जस्ट कॉन्स्टेंटली चैलेंजिंग देमसेल्फ एंड खुद ही देख रहे होते हैं वेयर आर वी एट विद अ सर्टन स्किल और नॉट, कैन वी पुश आवरसेल्व्स. बट वो एक बहुत नेचुरल प्रोसेस होता है बिकॉज कोई टॉप डाउन एक्सपेक्टेशन नहीं होती. जैसे अब जज़ा 1.5 है, वो स्कूटर जो है भाइयों का, अपने कज़न्स का, वो उठा लेती है एंड शी tries to move it with her 1 foot and all, but since there is no top down expectations, there is no expectation कि जज़ा कोई अब कुछ चलाना है या नहीं, वो हल्का हल्का अपने हिसाब से एक्सपेरिमेंट करती रहती है. कभी उसको पीछे लेके जाएगी, कभी टेढ़ा करेगी, कभी कुछ और करेगी. she comes up with her own strategies to navigate it because there is no expectation whatsoever कि ये कब तक कर लेना. So at that stage that's the only thing that I feel matters the most, which is the connection. फिर ऐसे आहिस्ता आहिस्ता जब बच्चे बड़े होते हैं तो साथ साथ फिर उनको कॉम्पिटेंस उन पर आना शुरू हो जाती है कि कैन आई रीड, इफ़ आई एम एबल टू रीड आई विल बी मोर एक्साइटेड टू रीड दिस, बट इफ़ आई एम नॉट एबल टू रीड आई डोंट वांट टू टच दिस बुक, यू नो. तो एक वो आ रही होती है उनके अंदर, कॉम्पिटेंस की बहुत इंपॉर्टेंस होना चाहिए. दे वांट टू डू थिंग्स दैट दे आर गुड एट and they don't want to do things that they're not good at. That also feeds into their social capital, because obviously if you are not considered competent, then obviously you're not cool enough. Yeah. जो भी. उसके बाद जैसे जैसे वो और बड़े होते हैं, आई वुड से समवेयर अराउंड एलिमेंट्री का एंड मिडिल ईयर्स, that is when they want more autonomy. Early pre-teens आना शुरू हो जाते हैं, तो they want some control, you know, just stop controlling our lives. We know what we want to do, give us more freedom. थोड़ा बहुत इस तरह की आपको voices आ रही होती हैं कि हमें भी अपनी मर्जी से कुछ करने दें. And I think when they're a little bit even older, somewhere around O levels or grade 8, that's when they start thinking about meaning as well. Okay, now I want to learn for meaning. I want to learn because इससे किसी को क्या फ़ायदा होगा, या मुझे क्या फ़ायदा होगा, या मेरे आगे के goals क्या हैं. So I feel like it's not like a uniform thing, ABC+M. Like you can't just say कि right from the get-go बच्चों को यही चाहिए होता है, but at different levels they need different things. But unfortunately school design ही ऐसा है कि now there is going to be autonomy, because everyone will learn जो teachers कहती हैं कि ये सीखना है, जो course कहता है ये सीखना है. There's no time or space for autonomy in schools. सबसे पहले तो ये तो बिल्कुल इसकी गुंजाइश नहीं है. कॉम्पिटेंस इस वजह से रह जाती है कि कुछ बच्चों के लिए अचीव हो जाती है जो क्लास के फ्रंट बेंचर्स हैं, जिनको आप कहते हैं पहले 10 बच्चे कॉम्पिटेंट फील कर रहे होते हैं, बाकी की 20 नहीं कर रहे होते, बिकॉज वी आर टीचिंग टू द एवरेज. एक माइंड है कि बस एक एवरेज हो जाए, जो बहुत ज़्यादा ऑब्वियसली उससे भी बियॉन्ड चैलेंज एक्सपेक्ट कर रहा है उसको भी नहीं मिल रहा, जो बहुत पीछे रह गया वो पीछे रह गया. बट वी स्टैंडर्डाइज थिंग्स, सो वी लूज द एस्पेक्ट ऑफ कॉम्पिटेंस. वी आर नॉट रियली विद इन एवरी चाइल्ड जोन ऑफ प्रॉक्सिमल डेवलपमेंट के आसपास हम काम नहीं कर रहे होते, हम एक स्टैंडर्ड पे काम कर रहे होते हैं. फिर कनेक्शन एंड मीनिंगफुलनेस. कनेक्शन फिर भी कभी कभी कुछ अच्छी काबिल टीचर्स बना जाती हैं इस सब के अंदर, इस मेस के अंदर भी, लेकिन कुछ नहीं बना पाते क्योंकि इतने बच्चे होते हैं, किस किस के साथ कनेक्शन बनाए, दोस्त. और ऑब्वियसली अगर आप हर किसी को आप अपनी दोस्तियाँ बिल्ड करने देंगे एंड ऑल, तो फिर वो फिर के पास पच जाएगा. यू डोंट इवन वांट देम टू बी टॉकिंग टू देयर फ्रेंड्स, यू डोंट वांट देम टू बी एंगेजिंग इन एनीथिंग अदर देन द एकेडमिक्स, राइट. सो वो कनेक्शन कहीं पे ढीला होता है, कहीं पे अच्छा होता है. इट्स जस्ट अ मिक्स ऑफ थिंग्स. एंड मीनिंग तो बस यही एक मीनिंग बताया जाता है कि इससे आगे आपको एक डिग्री मिल जाएगी, करियर मिल जाएगा. एंड personal meaning is not like a very important thing. It's not put on a very high pedestal कि इससे सीख के आपके लिए पर्सनली अभी क्या चीज़ अचीव होगी. एक बहुत दूर का एक मीनिंग दिखाया जा रहा होता है कि पढ़ोगे लिखोगे नौकरी मिलेगी, ये करोगे. सो दिस इज़ द स्कूल डिज़ाइन. बट आई वुड से इट्स नॉट जस्ट लाइक दैट बिकॉज ऑफ evil reasons. It is there because of a lot of logistical constraints which can be thought about more thoughtfully. But right now this is what it is. बहुत ही लंबा जवाब हो गया, but that's the crux of schooling, I feel.
I think schooling is a complex topic, and any answer which is too short and simple is definitely oversimplifying the challenges, because despite good intentions there are lots of challenges. So I appreciate that. मेरा इसमें एक सवाल मेरे जहन में आए while you were explaining the different things. एक सवाल तो मेरे जहन में ये आता है कि हम लोग इतनी we sit down and we talk about learning, talk about education. There's lots of private sector schools popping up. काफ़ी innovative approaches हैं, काफ़ी like people with their hearts in the right places are starting small projects. But I wonder कि क्या ये code crack हो सकेगा logistic limitations का, कि is there a way around it where due to logistical reasons those motivations or that curiosity is not struck down as badly. Kuch to again like part of the process hai, it's just the nature of life. But can we optimize kuch logistics?
I think मेरा तो नया मिशन ही ये optimization ढूंढना बन गया. But I think what I'm thinking about is very experimental right now. So I don't know if it is going to resonate with a lot of people. It needs to be studied properly. इसकी पूरी evaluation करने की ज़रूरत है. But I do feel there is a way. But I don't know if it resonates. Again, मेरे हिसाब से if we really look at what a child is learning in a school on a micro level, we'll realize that it's not too much in a given month, for instance. ठीक है, चाहे वो किसी भी स्कूल में जा रहे हैं, ठीक है, they are going to learn 3-4 concepts in math in a month, right? Usually एक यूनिट भी नहीं कवर होता, मुश्किल से होता है एक मंथ के अंदर. 4-5 साइंस के कॉन्सेप्ट्स होते हैं, 2-4 कहानियाँ पढ़ ली होती हैं कम्प्लीटली, बिकॉज बच्चों का पेस बहुत स्लो होता है क्लास के अंदर. आई डोंट नो इफ यू वुड हैव एक्सपीरियंस दिस विद योर टीचिंग एज वेल. इट्स नॉट लाइक द चिल्ड्रन, you give them 20 pages and the next day you're going to have a discussion about those 20 pages, right? It's going to be 1 page.
Yes.
And one lesson is usually 1 page or a paragraph or something that you're looking into. So over a course of a month, even in terms of quantity, which is the favorite thing for parents and teachers, ke cover ho jaye, course cover ho jaye, not a lot is covered, it's like very less. Okay? So keeping those things in mind, if we have to really see what is the child really getting out of the school over a period of month, it's going to be something that's very easily quantifiable. ये concepts है, ये चीज़ें हमने कर ली. So if it is really about just learning a few things, do they really have to happen in this specific manner, or can we take a more autonomy based approach to it, right? What I'm trying to say is कि अगर हम कह रहे हैं कि हमारा बच्चा 1 महीने स्कूल गया है और उसने 7 चीज़ें सीखी हैं और वो ये 7 चीज़ें इन डिसिप्लिन्स की हैं, हाउ वुड वी फील अबाउट इट कि अगर हमारा बच्चा वो ये 7 चीज़ें ना सीखे बट कुछ और 7-10 चीज़ें सीख लें जो उसके लिए अपने इंटरेस्ट से अलाइंड है. कैन वी से दैट वन इज़ अ रिप्लेसमेंट फॉर अनदर और नॉट is the question that can help us develop that model. Because if we say yes, it's okay if my child has not learned those specific 7 things, but my child has learned 10 those new things, and the skills that my child has learned along with those 10 things are valuable. The content my child has learned is valuable. It's going to stay with them longer because ये उनके अपने शौक से उन्होंने पढ़ा है. तो yes, maybe for a person like me that's more valuable. ठीक है. But then again, everyone's going to think differently about it. But for me, that's the only way out. That's the only way we can really bring motivation back into learning. मेरा अपना जो पर्सनल टेक है ना इस पे वो कुछ ऐसा है कि बच्चे जब इस तरह के पाथवे पे खुद चल पड़ते हैं ना तो डिफ़िकल्टी खुद ही ब्रेक डाउन हो जाती है. मतलब एक डिफ़िकल्टी उस चीज़ की होती है जो आप पे मुसल्लत की गई है. अब मुझे कोई आके कहे चाइनीज़ सीखो, मैं कहूँ भाई ना दिल है ना कुछ नहीं है, ज़रूरत भी फील नहीं हो रही, नहीं सीखनी. बट नहीं, तुम्हें अगर अब आगे प्रोग्रेस करना है तो तुम्हें चाइनीज़ तो आनी चाहिए. तो दैट वुड बी अ वेरी हार्ड थिंग फॉर मी टू deal with, right? But if it is a part of my own journey, so it will just start getting broken down into manageable steps on its own, because अगर मुझे इस point, then it is not about moving from A to Z, it is moving from A to B, B to C, C to D, तो वो छोटे छोटे साइजेस खुद ही उसके बाइट साइज में वो चली जाती चीज़ जब आप उस पर खुद वर्क कर रहे होते, बिकॉज यू हैव कंट्रोल ओवर हाउ मच यू वांट टू टेक ऑन and you have control over how much you want to deal with later on.
Right.
So I feel like ये चीज़ शायद सेल्फ डायरेक्टेड लर्निंग से ऑटोमेटिकली एड्रेस हो जाती है जब हम बच्चे को कंट्रोल देते हैं ऑफ हाउ दे नीड टू गो अबाउट इट. बिकॉज दिस इज समथिंग जो हमने तो बच्चों के साथ बहुत की भी है ना स्कूल के अंदर. वी डू दिस फ्री इंक्वायरी वीक्स जहाँ पे बच्चे जो हैं दे लर्न थिंग्स दैट दे वांट टू लर्न and then they push themselves obviously along the way and then they come and present what they have learned. तो उस पूरे process में मुझे ऐसी मुश्किल चीज़ें नज़र आई जो कि I'm sure would have taken them at times hours at a stretch to just navigate through, but उन्होंने की हैं because वो उनकी zone of proximal development में खुद ही आहिस्ता आहिस्ता आ गई थी चीज़ें, because उसके जो prerequisites थे वो उन्होंने खुद in the process fulfill कर लिए होते हैं to get there. So that's just something that really excites me.
आपके experience में ऐसी क्या चीज़ है? What is the main reason that adults, whether it is teachers or parents or school administrators, that they are unable to relinquish that control and allow the child a more self-directed learning experience? What is that?
It's a system right now. How do you do that with the current school? You can't. मतलब कहाँ पर देंगे कंट्रोल उन्हें? मैथ की क्लास में मैथ ही पढ़ाई जा रही होगी और वही टॉपिक पढ़ाया जा रहा होगा जो टीचर ने प्रिपेयर किया है. साइंस की क्लास में वही होगा जो साइंस के टीचर ने प्रिपेयर किया है, राइट? सो इवन एक्स्ट्रा करिकुलर्स वही होंगे जो कि फील्ड में पहले से सोचा हुआ है सर ने कि अच्छा आज ये कराना है, आज वो कराना है. सो देर इज़ दिस डिज़ायर टू keep this control which is kind of linked with the overall साल के हम पहले से जो curriculum goals determine करके बैठ जाते हैं क्योंकि हमने सबको one on build करना है towards O level. So there's no room for it. There's no room for any kind of self-directed learning in the school. And unfortunately जब बच्चे घरों में पहुंचते हैं पूरा दिन स्कूल का गुजार के तो there is no mental capacity to engage in self-directed learning after that because I wouldn't want to like हम लोग एक लेक्चर दिन का अटेंड कर ले या एक वर्कशॉप में चले जाएं and that's more than enough for us. It just is so draining at times to sit and listen to what people have to say for a very long time and they do it for 6-7 consecutive classes during the day and then you expect them to have hobbies, you expect them to be thriving and doing projects at home. They can't. They're humans too and they have limitations, cognitive limitations, right? That's why they don't want to talk about school at home because they're like we're done with it, we have done so much of it in the day. So अभी तो जो पूरा डिज़ाइन है उस सब में there is no गुंजाइश for children to have personal interests or to have even this thought कि मैं अपने लिए कुछ सीख सकता हूँ because अपने लिए सीखने की तो कोई स्पेस नहीं है ना उसकी कोई नीड फील कराई जाती है कि अच्छा इससे आपको कोई फ़ायदा होगा. वो तो होता है कि हमने आपकी पूरी ज़िंदगी आपके लिए प्लान आउट की कि आपको क्या मसला है, यू नो जस्ट डू व्हाट वी आर आस्किंग यू टू डू एंड बिकम्स अ सेल्फ फुलफिलिंग प्रोफेसी एज वेल. बच्चों को ना चॉइसेस आप लेने थे शुरू में फिर आके बड़े हो जाते हैं तो फिर कहते हैं कितनी बुरी चॉइसेस लेते हैं बच्चे, इनको तो कुछ आता ही नहीं है, डिसीजन मेकिंग नहीं है. दिस इज़ व्हाट शेख हमजा यूसुफ सेज एज वेल ना, वो इन वन ऑफ हिज लेक्चर्स अबाउट टॉक्स अबाउट एजुकेशन कि हमारा जो एजुकेशन सिस्टम है उनको चाइल्ड लाइक बहुत लंबे अरसे तक बना
चाइल्ड लाइक
child like because you know they don't even at 30 you know they want to find those patterns कि हमें कौन help कर देगा to move through the life because हमने तो उनको हमेशा से सब कुछ प्लेट में ला के दिया है. और स्कूल का डिज़ाइन भी यही है कि there is no voice of the child in the entire timetable.
That's very true and sometimes I feel like जो सब कुछ बच्चे के लिए मुतय्यन कर देना और उसको करना it's hard on them, it's hard for us but ऐसा कोई momentum बना हुआ है that we are not able to you know snap out of it. लेकिन जो अभी आपने मुझे जवाब दिया इस बात का कि what is the reason that we're not able to relinquish the control, it's interesting that you use the word system कि बस system ऐसा है. So you know there is this German philosopher forgive me अगर मैं नाम गलत Habermas or something is his name and he talks about this thing and he says that you know essentially जो इंसानों की आपस की जो ज़िंदगी है that's a life world और जब life world बड़ा हो जाता है तो उसको मैनेज करने के लिए सिस्टम बनाया जाता है. But eventually what ends up happening is that the system colonizes the life world. You know. And so he goes into the detail of it all and everything. So bottom line उसकी वो ये बहुत interesting है. Again, it is also one of those theories that I was talking about that applies in so many aspects of life. That he says that when the system colonizes the life world, then any action becomes devoid of right intentions, most actions. And they become strategic actions. तो वो communicative actions नहीं होते, वो strategic होते हैं. Now strategic action को he defines it and he says कि they are made to sound like they are for you, but they're actually for the system.
They're always for the system, you know. मतलब कुछ भी मैं literally when we started Edopia and we started studying the school, realize it's nothing in it is for the child really, you know. It is eventually for the system, for this desire to take them to a certain place that perhaps they don't have a desire to go to on their own or they might want to go there in a different manner. मैं ये नहीं कह रही कि आप बच्चे को O levels ना कराएं या ना whatever, it is a means to an end and ठीक है, it is an important part of life. They should be doing O levels if it is needed. बट उससे पीछे वाली की जो नॉइज़ है ना वो मुझे बहुत ज़्यादा ट्रबल करती है कि ये और भी तरीके हैं इस जगह तक पहुंचने के और कभी कभी मुझे अपना ये सोल्यूशन इतना सिंपलिस्टिक लगता है कि मुझे लगता है इट्स सो सिंपल दैट इज़ वाई पीपल डोंट वांट टू एक्सेप्ट इट, बिकॉज दे लाइक ये क्या बात हुई है, इसमें तो कुछ था ही नहीं, व्हाट इज शी प्रपोजिंग,
व्हाई डोंट यू मेक इट कॉम्प्लिकेटेड एंड फैंसी एंड मोर inaccessible so that people are attracted to
because this is too simple that you ask children what is it that you want to learn this month and I'll give you support to learn that. Just sounds so boring and banal कि क्या बात है, but this is what it is कि दे देते हैं ये choice and let's see what they do out of this, and मतलब मैंने पिछली वाली हमजा के साथ जो podcast की थी उसमें मैंने ये कहा था कि just imagine how different that would be, if every month the child gets to decide कि मैंने क्या करना है, and then आप 8 साल 9 साल के बच्चे की बात कर रहे हैं, और for the next let's say 5-6 years of his life, that's like maybe 60 months में वो 60 times ये बात सोचे कि मैंने क्या पढ़ना है, मुझे क्या सीखना चाहिए. So that in its own is going to be significantly so much more of essence and meaning than anything that they're going to learn in those 60 months at school. Just this thought that the child is taking control and feeling that responsibility to learn. But
yeah, for sure.
For people, this is like, it's too simple.
It's too simple, and that's a consistent pattern. That's why when you asked me that if my child takes the easier way out, and it should not feel like they're lazy. It's fine. Like, if you figured an easier way out, you're smart then. आपने कोई आसान तरीका ढूंढा चीज़ों का. अब इसमें ये है कि आई थिंक इट हैज़ टू डू डायरेक्टली विद मोटिवेशन, व्हाट यूर सेइंग, कि अगर आप उस बच्चे को वो इख्तियार दे दें कि जो उसका रुझान है उसको वो कर सके, उसके ऊपर अमल कर सके या उसको परसू कर सके, तो वो उसकी मोटिवेशन ऑटोमेटिकली बढ़ाएगा. एंड आई थिंक इट कम्स बैक टू द कॉन्सेप्ट ऑफ मीनिंग, राइट, बिकॉज दैट विल हैव एन इंट्रिंसिक मीनिंग फॉर द चाइल्ड. इट विल गिव द चाइल्ड द प्लेजर, एंड द प्लेजर विल बी इनफ टू मोटिवेट द चाइल्ड सस्टेनेबली, एंड द पेरेंट वोंट हैव टू द टीचर वोंट हैव टू काइंड ऑफ exercise that amount of hovering control, and वो सारे आपको नहीं करने पड़ेंगे होपफुली चीज़ें. नाउ दैट हैज़ बिन एक्सप्लोर्ड एक्चुअली, एंड इट्स बिन स्टडीड कि कभी कभार क्या होता है कि हमारी लाइफ में कुछ चीज़ें प्लेजर, सो टू से दे आर सपोज टू ब्रिंग प्लेजर बट दे डोंट, बिकॉज दे आर नॉट मीनिंगफुल. नाउ अगर आप गूगल रिव्यू देखेंगे तो वो बहुत हाई रिव्यूज़ होंगे किसी चीज़ के. जब आप वो करती हैं एंड यू फील लाइक ओके दिस वाज क्वाइट अंडरवेलमिंग, मुझे तो
that's personally not meaningful,
right? So it's not meaningful for you, so it does not bring you pleasure. Now children, I think in their learning experience go through that a lot of times, what you're saying, because the system is like that. So the sports day, and they might dread it. Like the school is with the pom-poms and the singing and flowers and everything, but they might dread it that I just wanted to watch some TV. What is this? So I think the link between meaning and pleasure is so strong for every human being, and from the beginning, बिल्कुल छोटी उम्र से ये बहुत strong होता है. Now what gives that meaning might evolve with age. For a little child, like you're saying, there are no expectations. The meaning could just be part of being being in a group, right? Like you mentioned कि मेरे friends क्या हैं, or is the teacher waiting for me. Slightly older, the meaning उसकी dimension change होती जाती है. But I have come to understand this right at this point, at least. I think meaning and pleasure are very strongly connected. And if you figure out for yourself or for the child or for the student that you're teaching that how can I make it more meaningful for them, you might find a path of least resistance to get to them, right? In fact, एक ये इन्होंने study भी की थी in which they said that there is this concept called anhedonia, the inability to feel pleasure. Doing all those things which are supposed to bring pleasure, they don't bring you pleasure, and it is cited as one of the major reasons for suicides.
Absolutely, yeah. Because
accumulating experiences, बहुत सारे pleasure के experiences हैं या ambitious चीज़ें हैं या achievements हैं, but they're not striking that point of meaning, hence don't bring pleasure, don't increase motivation, and create too much mental clutter. And so the person just unfortunately decides to close the whole deal.
कल ही मैं पढ़ी थी in one of her, वो दुआ वाली एक book थी यकीन इंस्टीट्यूट की, and there was a dua that I told him that oh I've never asked this dua but it's so interesting, and that is Allah Ta'ala protect me from knowledge that doesn't benefit me and I was like I've never asked for this but it's so powerful कि protect me from knowledge जिसका मुझे कोई फ़ायदा नहीं होगा, अभी मेरा टाइम मेरा cognitive load पे it will add to it, टाइम वेस्ट होगा. And children बेचारे तो go through so much of this every day, go through knowledge that doesn't benefit from them. And अब तो खैर मेरे बच्चे तो स्कूल वाले थोड़े हैं भी माशाल्लाह वोकल ज़्यादा है ना, तो उनसे देयर चिल्ड्रन हु वुड blatantly outrightedly say कि हम तो स्कूल अपने दोस्तों के लिए आते हैं, हमें तो we don't come here to study because we know what we want to do eventually and we know कि हमने उस तक कैसे पहुंचना है, but we don't have friends at home so we come to the school for our friends. And honestly initially तो थोड़ा सा आपको शॉकिंग लगता है कि कितनी बदतमीज़ी कर रहे हैं बेटा, आप पैसे वेस्ट कर रहे हो अपने पेरेंट्स के, क्यों आ रहे हो, the initial response as an adult is like यार क्यों पैसे वेस्ट कर रहे हो, फिर घर बैठो. बट they have this is so true, कहाँ लाए वो अपने ये दोस्त घर में, तो वो कहते हैं बस हम the harder parts are just there so that we can get to the main part which is being able to be a part of the social community. So I just feel so sad for them when they say that, because unfortunately हम लोग वो design ही नहीं ला सके which really plays to their strengths उस तरह से, या which really plays to who they are. I feel like कि अगर सब schools starting point ये ले लेना कि what is going to motivate my customer, who's the child, are they the customers, let's say they are the customer. हर बाकी सारी फील्ड्स में, इंडस्ट्रीज़ में, कपड़ों की दुकान हो गई, जूतों की, restaurants, we are always playing to the motivation of other people. What is going to motivate them to come and wear my XYZ brand or whatever.
The client,
right?
Yes.
But in this one instance we just don't care what motivates our client, we only care what they fear, like what the parents fear, and we design something around their fears but not to the motivation of our client. Like if we really start all designs with this idea कि अच्छा जो भी मैं चीज़ अब बनाने लगी हूँ, this is going to be extremely important for me to keep in mind कि इससे बच्चा किस तरह benefit करेगा, उनको क्या what will make them more autonomous in the process, how are they going to go on a personal journey of meaning and what not. तो हमारा तो school design process ही change हो जाएगा. And इतना अभी भी मेरे लिए funny भी होता है, क्या होता है मतलब like I don't have an answer to this when parents come कि अच्छा जी आपका अगर इस तरह का स्कूल है तो अगर मेरे बच्चे को आर्ट्स में ज़्यादा इंटरेस्ट है या मेरे बच्चे को कोडिंग में ज़्यादा इंटरेस्ट है तो आप कैसे हेल्प करेंगे. एंड आई गो लाइक अभी तो मैं कोई हेल्प नहीं कर सकती बिकॉज उन्होंने मैथ की क्लास में मैथ पढ़नी है, साइंस की क्लास में साइंस पढ़नी है, फील्ड बाहर जाना है, या देर आर गोइंग टू पॉकेट्स ऑफ टाइम इन बिटवीन वेयर दे कैन कम एंड दे कैन वर्क ऑन दोज इंटरेस्ट एज कम्पेयर टू अदर स्कूल. शायद वहाँ पे इतना पॉकेट ऑफ टाइम नहीं होता या इस तरह का एक enabling environment उस तरह का नहीं होता. बट स्टिल I'm not really even at this point able to say कि if your child is an artist and has a strong inclination for being an artist, 10 years down the lane they would be one of the best artists possible because there are limitations, but those limitations can be worked around if the design is changed. But like being a parent, if you do go forward, let's say कि आप अपने बच्चों को स्कूल से पुल आउट कर लेते हैं, let's not say कि अभी कोई नया सिस्टम आ गया, your project portfolio is still to be launched in June, let's say कि अभी उसमें टाइम है, but you decide कि मैं होम स्कूल कर लेती हूँ and I'm going to take this model of learning where every month I'm going to ask my child what is it that you want to learn and I'm going to be your facilitator in helping you learn that. What are your fears?
Pulling a child out of school, what are your fears?
कि अगर आप इस तरह के मॉडल पे ले जाएं where you give your child the autonomy to decide बेटा तुमने इस महीने क्या सीखना है and I'm just going to be a coach for you to help you achieve that, and that's the kind of learning that you continue all the way up till O levels. आपके क्या fears होंगे as a parent?
Okay, my one fear would be that I might not able to give them sufficient attention and time.
Do you think teachers can give more time than you can?
That's a good question. I would like to think so.
Because
But
they have 25 other children to cater to as well, which you don't.
absolutely correct. That's correct. But again, like I have homeschooled my children for some time, and looking at that, that was one consistent point in my mind that I should be giving more time.
Yeah.
I should be giving more focus, or I'm too much in a rush, you know. एक तो ये रहता है, दूसरा ये भी
But
आता
were
है.
you teaching your children as a homeschooling parent, or were you just facilitating their learning?
I was learning alongside. I started with wanting to facilitate, but I felt like because the way we have learned is that way, so there was a tendency that despite those intentions, I would go towards teaching, but then I'd have to, you know, come back and recenter myself. So there's a back and forth, I think. You can't necessarily always jump out of your skin and enact something which you've never experienced. वो काफी मुश्किल होता है. So that is one of my fears. Would be one of my fears if I were to take my children out of a system. कि क्या मैं उनको उतना वक्त दे पा रही हूँ. Second would be कि कुछ personal चीज़ें सीपें तो नहीं कर रही. You know, some kind of impatience, some kind of negative feedback. You know, something from your own childhood, some voices. So yeah, इस किस्म की ज़्यादा होंगी. It would be more about my own self. That are they like hopefully only benefiting and not getting any harm. But you're right. If you think of it in relation to other human beings, those all elements are there as well.
Yeah.
For the teacher.
Absolutely. You know, that just makes me think, yeah, the teacher might have like her own emotional baggages from her childhood, which would be impacting your child, and you won't even know about it.
Yes.
And then there is this aspect of attention. In a class of 25, there is absolutely no way that a teacher is going to give more time to your child than what you can give to your child, right? And how much of your time does a child really need, like in terms of actively you speaking to them? One is like your presence or your that sense of reliability that I can go to my parent to ask if I'm stuck, you know, that's more passive. One is active, which is like how much time of a day do you really need to spend talking to your child, which is not usually a lot, you know. So I feel like again, like the answer is so simple and so cost effective. But since it is so simple and so cost effective that a lot of people would rather want to send their children to expensive schools to get something that perhaps they can be better at providing at home. One aspect that I do feel that is usually not at home is things that build your resilience.
Okay.
So that's, I do feel that's something that there's no conflict at home that's significant. And जो होता है ना good enough mother वाला एक concept कि you need to be very receptive to the needs of your child and you need to be, you know, there for their spontaneous needs, but at the same time you need to distance yourself from the child as well so that they can build their capacity to engage with the world and to build their independence. So obviously if the child is home at all times, so encountering the other perspectives, other family values, other conflicts, you know, all of that is kind of brought down, and
being exposed to elements
outside of the culture of your home, the world, right? वो आपको obviously एक school बहुत अच्छी तरह से देता है because there's a hot pot of so many different values and all. लड़ना पड़ता है, it's harsh, you know, it's just like, you know, it's very difficult to be a child overall. दोस्ती बनाना, अपने आप को adapt करना. So that aspect obviously is missing in homeschooling generally, and I do see कि जब बच्चे होम स्कूल हो रहे होते हैं, I think like in terms of the learning, it's marvelous. It's nothing even comes close to what any school is doing. अगर parent is exposed to a certain extent, obviously यहाँ पे specialized discipline आ जाते हैं, वहाँ पे obviously school kind of contributes, but if the parent is able to also navigate through those more specialized disciplines to an extent, then homeschooling is very good for learning. But ये वाली जो aspects आते हैं ना जहाँ पे socially, you know, बच्चों को establish करनी अपनी identity, that is where it takes a hit. So
do you think that can be do you think that can be supplemented in other ways? I'm just thinking because when I was homeschooling, the initial idea was to do a co-op, not like a homeschool, a co-op. but it was hard to get it
Yeah.
across, and to like generate enough confidence कि ये भी कुछ होता है. And by the time it's kind of come, my children are much older now. So one other thing that I do feel like can supplement, make up for that exposure to elements and well-roundedness that you're saying, is a generally otherwise rich community experience, which is not necessarily related to learning.
Yeah. Just being around different kind of people, different families. मतलब इतनी सारा कुछ दुनिया में आप देखते हो, करते हो, and when you actually realize ना कि being home वाली जो feeling है, that is when you are in a community. वो आपकी एक जब आ जाती है ना realization, so that just is then it doesn't matter whether you're in a developed country or an underdeveloped country or in a very big house or in a small house. When you have a community around you, that is really what makes you feel at home. And this is something that I've personally experienced. बहुत ज़्यादा कि लोगों की बहुत ज़्यादा value है आप जिनसे अपने आप को surround कर रहे होते हो. So yes, if families are able to build a community around themselves in whatever ways, not again learning communities कि सिर्फ homeschooling parents are, but even if they're like cousins, if they are neighbors, if they're people that the children encounter very often, they can learn. वो जो हमारी पिछली पॉडकास्ट की बात थी ना कि हिस्टोरिकली लर्निंग यूज टू हैपन बिकॉज देयर वाज अ नीड फॉर लर्निंग कि कुछ सीखने का ज़रूरत पेश आई तो उसके बाद हमने सीखना शुरू किया. सो हो सकता है कि एक बच्चा जो घर में हर महीने देयर इज़ नो प्रेशर बट येस उसको हो गया यार व्हेन एवर यू वांट टू लर्न समथिंग यू हैव टू स्टार्ट द प्रोसेस तो वो एक डिस्पोजिशन ही आ जाए ना. तो आई फील दैट्स रियली रियली valuable. But I think a lot of parents feel like that. It's just that putting all of these different elements together into a system again is what gets in the way of this intuitive thinking.
But one of the ways that, again, like Habermas, he says that the system can get more in touch with the life world is to have better communication, open communication with clear intentions. So he says कि उससे फिर जो colonizing effect है वो कुछ कम हो जाता है and actually life world penetrates the system a bit more. And I've seen that in Ethiopia. I can map it on to the the democratic assemblies. So there is some kind of वो efficacy भी है and there's some nature of the life world communicating or exerting its effort या pushback देना system को. That's very important. I have one question which we have not talked about. जो motivation में बड़ा common सा एक challenge आता है वो ये आता है कि जो repetitive tasks है how to sustain motivation in that. Now for this I wanted to ask you, for the teacher as well as the student and for yourself, जो बार बार करने पड़ते हैं. So I've seen my children struggle with that a lot. How many times do I have to do that? Teachers also feel like, I was talking to a friend and I was telling her the same thing कि मुझे पहली दफ़ा पढ़ाना एक चीज़ बहुत मज़ा आता है, दोबारा पढ़ाना थोड़ा मुश्किल लगता है, लेकिन उसका अपना एक है ज़ाहिर है you go deeper next time. So what do you think? उसको मोटिवेशन को कैसे सस्टेन करें क्योंकि लर्निंग की नेचर बहुत रिपेटिटिव हो चुकी है बहुत ज़्यादा.
लर्निंग की नेचर रिपीटेटिव हो चुकी है बट टू व्हाट एंड इज़ दैट बेनिफिटिंग द चाइल्ड इज़ माय फर्स्ट क्वेश्चन. सी रेपिटेशन की हमारे दीन में भी बहुत ज़्यादा इम्पोर्टेंस है राइट. एंड उस दिन आई मेट अ पेरेंट एंड शी सेड कि अगर दीन में या किसी भी चीज़ में आप रिपीट करते हो तो वो इंसान फॉरगेटफुल है बाय नेचर. हम फॉरगेटफुल हैं तो रेपिटेशन रिमाइंडर्स आर वेरी इंपॉर्टेंट फॉर अस टू कंसिस्टेंटली बी ऑन दैट पाथ. तो ऑब्वियसली रेपिटेशन की इम्पॉर्टेंस तो है बट लाइक what is being repeated is also of importance over here, right?
Okay.
So like for instance अगर स्कूल के अंदर कोई चीज़ repetition के थ्रू सीखी जा रही है तो वहाँ पे एक प्रेशर है of being with the pace of the class जिसके लिए वो repetition एक certain तरह से करनी ज़रूरी हो रही है. But if that pressure is not there and the goal is still there but the pressure of doing it at a certain time during a certain week उस तरह नहीं है तो maybe you can be slower with it, maybe you can be faster with it, maybe you can come up with your own way to do it. कहाँ पे repetition आती होगी? maybe tables याद करने में आती होगी, phonics में आती होगी, कुछ मैथ्स की प्रैक्टिस में आती हो गई, यही चीज़ें हैं ना रेपिटेशन की जो कि विच गेट टू द चिल्ड्रन, राइट? सो ये तो अभी के ऑब्जेक्टिव्स के साथ अलाइन है, बिकॉज यू हैव टू कीप अप विद द पेस ऑफ a certain space, you know, so you have to do it like that. But for me, the repetition that is kind of more valuable is the repetition of the process.
Okay.
So every time you're going to do something new, but maybe what you're going to adhere to is the process of goal setting, you know. So that is meaningful repetition for me.
Okay.
कि बच्चे को हर दफ़ा एक बड़ी स्टेटमेंट, गोल स्टेटमेंट लिखनी है, फिर उस गोल स्टेटमेंट को स्मार्ट चेकलिस्ट के थ्रू गुजारना है, राइट?
Okay.
उसको बाइट साइज करना है, फिर आपको अपने गोल को छोटे पार्ट्स में लिखना है और आपने 30 दिनों के अपने छोटे छोटे एजेंडाज लिखने हैं कि अच्छा आज के दिन मैं ये करूँगा, अगले दिन मैं ये. That will enable me to get to that goal. So there is still repetition. Every month we might be doing the same thing, but you'd be doing a different thing every month with it, you know. So this is like meaningful repetition. And some repetition is just there because we want to stick to what is being done in the classroom and we don't want to lag behind and all of that. Which is, you know, in real life, we don't really have to do any of that kind of repetition anymore. Obviously, unless, okay, so that also takes us to the question, कि कुछ jobs इतनी repetitive nature की हैं, you know, so that's again going to be something that the child might encounter later on, कि मेरी job में तो मुझे रोज़ आके यही काम करना पड़ रहा है, ठीक है? But something that we often forget is that an adult has an option to quit. A child doesn't, you know. So if this is not really aligned with your personality, if repetition gets to you, you're not going to continue working that job for a long time. You're going to step out and you're going to find something that's not very repetitive. And then there might be people who enjoy repetition, you know, and then might still get into those jobs.
It simplifies things for them.
So it's like a choice, and then later on you can align it with your personality needs. But a child just does not have an option to quit, which is so unfair. कि आप मतलब I think giving that option to quit is grace, you know. This is like a human's right to quit. हम हर चीज़ जो हमें नहीं पसंद हम करते रहे. It's just so painful. Life would become so painful, right? It's not just a loser's thing कि आप quit कर दो,
it's
right?
really not.
But the children don't have that option to quit. Play is only fair when you have an option to quit. Otherwise, it is not play. You know, अगर आप उस equation से निकल सकते हैं तो तभी ये play होता है, वरना तो नहीं होता. तब तो otherwise it's an activity or whatever. So I feel like क्योंकि बच्चों को option to quit नहीं दिया जाता, इसीलिए repetition ज़्यादा, you know, it bears more heavily on them कि क्या करना है. But if they do have an option to quit and maintain their own pace and have some autonomy over how they're going to benefit from that repetition, they can determine maybe better things for themselves.
That's interesting. That's interesting. Because ये बड़ा common है कि how many times do we have to do things? And I guess then we also have to look into that motivation is necessary, but alone may not be sufficient to perseverance. You know, you also need to have sabr, cultivate sabr करना या, you know, patience अपने अंदर बड़ी ज़रूरी है. It's one element. Motivation is one element in the picture, right?
I think थोड़ा paradigm change भी है, because आदत नहीं होगी खास तौर पे बच्चों को इस तरह कभी सीखने की, क्योंकि कोई इस तरह सिखा ही नहीं रहा होता अपने बच्चों को. इवन होम स्कूलिंग में ना कुछ फैमिलीज आई एम श्योर शायद इस बात पे हों ऑलरेडी, मेजरली इट्स वेरी टॉप डाउन, ये कर लो ये सीखना है, ये गोल्स हैं हमारे, यू नो. So I don't know how the children are initially going to take it when they have to they can do it over a sustained period of time. Are they going to get exhausted by always, you know, taking responsibility?
That's true.
That's another thing, because कुछ लोगों को होता है कि यार easy करके ना just plate में दे दो तो we are happy doing that. So this is obviously going to be new in that manner, but यही है कि persevere करने के लिए like I don't know, you said motivation might not be enough, but I feel like if you're rightly motivated, you might persevere as well. It's just something that they're not accustomed to. So we don't know. इसकी एक habit बनानी पड़ेगी, इसकी एक फादियत समझानी पड़ेगी initially, और फिर उनको दिखाना पड़ेगा इसके results. And perhaps that is how they can be on this path for a longer period of time.
Right. I think what I mean by motivation not being sufficient or enough is that there will be times in life, like you're saying, whether it's in school or outside, when you're older in relationships, practical life, that you might struggle to find anything at that point that is motivating you. And that can be a very difficult time for people if they are, quote unquote, addicted to motivation. ये भी एक problem है, like dopamine addiction itni zyada ho jaye that if something does not motivate you, you can't move yourself. That is also an issue. Again, we will go on another tangent agar hum is baat ko
I
lekar
think that's
chale,
the
but
real
yeah.
issue. कि
Now we have come to the real
that's
issue.
the real issue. कि, what if you get so used to getting things done as per your motivation? So maybe that's one area which needs more thought and reflection.
Yes, so I think there is a cluster of things which help a person. So just like when you're packing for a journey, you pack several different things for several different scenarios, right? The basics, the medicines, just in case, just in time, lots of things go into that, right? So वही है कि इसको हमारे दीन में भी कहते हैं कि आपका ज़्यादा राह होता है, सामान होता है, which you might need. So motivation is definitely one of those things, like like in the Swiss Army knife, आपके पास मुख्तलिफ चीज़ें होती हैं which come out of it. But I think it's one thing. It's one thing, and it's important to embed it in the cluster somewhere, so that when that one tool is not there, you have something else to help you out, trudge on at that time.
So I guess something else also needs to be there to prepare them for this kind of, like, you need to prepare for this pitfall,
for this as well, which is why they say that it's a very interesting concept. बार बार हम अक्सर इसको डिस्कशन में जिक्र भी होता है in my discussions, that there is no such thing as an absolute disadvantage also. So children who are growing up in situations which is very demotivating, everything is outside of their control, they don't feel competent at anything, they are developing something else.
And they might have more qadar for something else.
Exactly. So there is no such thing as an absolute advantage or absolute disadvantage. There is, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala ने हर चीज़ की ये कोई एंगल ऐसा रखा है जहाँ से कोई और चीज़ नशोनुमा होती है उसकी. So इतना भी परेशान नहीं होना चाहिए, I guess, कि अगर motivation कम है. So that's just for perspective to remember.
Absolutely. Any parting thoughts? We have not at all touched on intrinsic and extrinsic motivation, but that's okay. I think I guess that's extrinsic motivation. I think school design का crux है ना, grades, praise, achievements, which do, like, behaviorists उसे कहते हैं कि ऐसे नहीं कहें कि बिल्कुल extrinsic motivation का कोई role नहीं है. It's not very conducive for learning, but it is conducive for outcomes. So
it's a tool you can use.
It's a tool. It does, like, when they say there's too much of there are too many extrinsic rewards, so the learning aspect goes down significantly, because then you only want to get to a certain goal for the sake that is beyond learning, for some other reasons जो कि हैं, लेकिन outcome फिर भी उससे achieve हो जाता है. Whereas the real thing that all schools or designers and everyone needs to aspire towards is intrinsic motivation. कि अगर आपको कोई reward ना भी मिल रहा हो इसके end पर, आपको कोई award ना भी मिल रहा हो, आपको कोई recognition ना भी मिल रही हो, आपका फिर भी दिल करे to do that thing. So, but I think obviously अभी तो पहले तो design ही इतना anti motivation है कि intrinsic motivation की place वहाँ पे ढूंढना is like the harder task. That's maybe step 2, कि पहले तो डिज़ाइन के लेवल पे चीज़ें अगर improve हों तो फिर हम intrinsic motivation के बारे में भी ज़्यादा बात कर सकते हैं, but not with the current design.
That's important that you touched on it, and definitely हमारी discussion में we might have thought we'll go into it, but there's so many other things. बात ही बहुत दूर से शुरू होती है कि intrinsic extrinsic तक आए. But I was looking into this, and Ibn Qayyim rahimahullah ta'ala talks about this, and he says extrinsic और intrinsic को ही उन्होंने explain किया है. So he uses the terminology मुराद ली नफ्सिही, मुराद ली गैरिही. So मुराद ली नफ्सिही, that for its own self, कोई चीज़ आपकी desired है, so that is you're intrinsically motivated. और मुराद ली गैरिही, that some other thing is driving your desire for that particular goal, right? And according to him, Ibn Qayyim rahimahullah ta'ala, he says that intrinsic goals should organize your extrinsic goals.
Yeah.
It's a good scheme.
Yeah.
Again, like Hamla, there's so many ways of looking at things, but it's a good scheme to look into, right? कि आपके intrinsic motivators जो हैं, they should organize your extrinsic rather than the other way around. But again, for that, you need to be a person who
really
is discovering what is meaningful for them.
Yeah.
You know, because a lot of times आपके environmental meanings are seeping into your headspace and you think they are meaningful for you, but actually you are just reenacting जो आप देख रहे होते हैं इर्द गिर्द, which is where I think the element in our religion comes in, of solitude, of reflection, of pausing and of stopping, so that you're able to, you know, आप इन चीज़ों को अलहदा कर सकें.
Do you think religion में तो extrinsic rewards की बहुत बात की जाती है?
बहुत की जाती है.
तो you know, like even the hereafter, जन्नत, hell से बचना, punishment and all of that's there. But obviously from our day-to-day life, we don't want to have those things prevalent in our lives कि extrinsic rewards इतने ज़्यादा बात ना किए जाए. Can you just reflect on this, you know, contradiction?
Extrinsic को क्यों इतना अहमियत दी जाती है?
मज़हब में तो है ना, there is reward, there is punishment, right? And this is all extrinsic, like because maybe शायद intrinsically इंसान को सिर्फ कहा जाता कि सिर्फ अल्लाह ताला की कुर्बत के लिए कर लें, तो maybe some people would have been like ठीक है, some people would have, but वो ये है कि you know there is going to be hellfire and then there is going to be reward of the jannat and all of that, so those are very extrinsic, you know. So but regular dialogue में it's very like extrinsic को बहुत negatively देखा जा रहा होता है. So I just want to understand कि आप क्यों लगता है, you know, I don't know if this is an area that you'd want to comment on, but I'm just thinking कि एक तरफ वहाँ पे मज़हब में ये है, life में we want to discourage extrinsic rewards, so how does that tie together?
Right, that's a good I think dilemma that you have pointed out, seeming dilemma. It's not really an actual dilemma in my opinion. It's not a contradiction or a dilemma, and this is a conversation that I've had with my father so many times. Just trying to, you know, figure out first. When I was younger, I would try to figure out that what is he saying. Then I would figure out how I agree with him. And now when I'm much older, I'm like, I don't agree with him. And let me help him see it differently, right? So ये बातें हमने बहुत दफ़ा की कि extrinsic goals इतने ज़्यादा क्यों हैं, extrinsic rewards इतने ज़्यादा क्यों बताए गए. So the first thing I would share, in my opinion, is that there's nothing shallow about extrinsic motivation. It's just an appreciation of a dimension of human nature, right? So I think इंसान को appreciate करना चाहिए जो भी अल्लाह सुब्हाना ताला ने उसकी फितरी responses रखे हैं, they must be respected. It should not be that because this is not intrinsic, it's shallow, right? So I think religion, deen, again, फितरत पे है, तो वो comes from appreciating the whole human, right? And not saying that अच्छा कोई बहुत ही overthinker होगा तो उसको हम appreciate करेंगे, या कोई बहुत materialistic होगा तो उसको हम denounce कर देंगे, right? So there, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala ने, I think he has made a scheme of things which appreciates whatever kind of mizaj you have. It will flatter you. The reward will make you happy. आपका जैसा भी मिजाज है आपको fulfilling लगेगा. For instance, if you are somebody who is intrinsically motivated, you will find the depth in deen, in the Quran, in the Seerah, in ahadith. You will be satiated. आपका जी भर जाएगा उससे. But if you are somebody who doesn't want to go too much into it, and you know, who likes to keep things simple, then, and who wants to look ahead towards what is more rewarding, उसके लिए भी पूरा इंतज़ाम है. So I think it only makes it more holistic and does not make it contradictory.
Okay, yeah.
It's a more fulfilling and more appreciative, more inclusive approach of rewarding people. And you know, like आजकल ये बड़ी terminology चल रही है कि inclusivity होनी चाहिए in different aspects of life, and I think Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is the most inclusive, of course, being, right? So he has created a system where the reward is going to please everyone.
Yeah, which is hard to perhaps bring about in schools, right? Because then there's competition and then there's the feeling of hostility towards other people and all. But I don't know how to.
But that's also, I think, necessary. That contrast is necessary
Yeah.
between the dunya and the akhirah as
Yeah.
well. That contrast is very much necessary. So again, not necessarily a fault of the school here. It's just an attribute, a characteristic. Uske beyond shayad ja bhi nahi paaye, and it may not be meant to be that.
Yeah.
So unless you despair from this, you will not look ahead at that,
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
So yahan se despair, I think hona bhi is fine. Like now they are saying that, get comfortable being uncomfortable. तो यही है कि यहाँ की कुछ चीज़ों को accept कर लें कि they are not up to the mark, so that you have something to look ahead. Yeah.
Okay. Any parting thoughts about motivation, Mahwish?
Parting thoughts. I think motivation, when you have it, it's a blessing. When you don't have it, that is a test.
Yeah.
But both things should be managed with sensibility and responsibility. Motivation बहुत ज़्यादा होना, riding high on it can also become shallow.
Yeah.
Or not being able to get beyond a point of despair is also not something a human being should face, that kind of obstruction. So yeah, those are my parting thoughts. What about you?
No, I think I'm also more or less along the same spectrum of thoughts right now. Like, figuring out how to navigate your life without motivation is also important. And though while you do it with motivation, it might just become even more beautiful, like, so it's ihsan, like I think motivation brings the ihsan to your life, the beauty to your life, and figuring out how to get out of the bed even when you're not motivated brings resilience, so taking both of those hand in hand. But obviously, like any system, any solution, I would say, not even system, there are pros and cons, so you'd have to see what has more pros in terms of afadiyat uski kya hogi, before, like school as is के भी बहुत फ़ायदे हैं और बहुत सारे नुकसान आते हैं, एंड किसी नई इनोवेटिव अप्रोच के भी बहुत सारे फ़ायदे होंगे, एंड कुछ पिटफॉल्स भी होंगी. सो वी हैव टू सी व्हाट has more weight in the bigger scheme of things and go ahead with it, I guess.
I agree with you. Bigger scheme of things is definitely something. I think if we look at the larger picture, it can give us a more sustainable source of motivation as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much, Mahwish, for doing this. I had a good time. I hope you did too. और मिलते हैं अगली podcast के साथ.
Inshallah. Thank you for having me, and I thoroughly enjoyed myself. Jazakallah.